Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm 33 years old, and what I'm about to tell you isn't just another family story. It's the harsh reality of how you can give everything for the people you love, only to discover that not only do they not value you, but they replace you without even an explanation. 4 years, and without anyone's knowledge, I paid the mortgage on the house where my parents and I grew up. For months, when I ran out of money, I thought about them, about how they wouldn't lose the roof over their heads. I did it in secret, without asking for anything in return, because that's what true love is like. Silent, constant, and without expectations. But everything changed one afternoon I thought would be normal. An ordinary day that ended up breaking my soul. My parents asked me to leave the house. They told me, with cold words and without remorse, that the property was no longer mine or theirs, but my brother's. That it was time for me to make my life elsewhere. Imagine that feeling. That after years of holding the foundations together, paying every month without anyone knowing, I was told I no longer had the right to stay. That there was no place for me in the place we called home. That's the cruel irony of life, when you give everything and in the end, you're just seen as a disposable option. And have you ever felt used? Like you were just an ATM with a last name, a machine to pay bills and solve problems, but without a real place in your family's heart? If the answer is yes, then this story will resonate with you more than you can imagine. Because there is nothing more painful than giving your life to others and discovering that even that wasn't enough. I want you to stay with me, to listen to every word, because behind this story lies a lesson in strength, resilience, and above all, silent justice. This is not just a tale of betrayal, but the journey of a woman who learned to value herself when others stopped doing so. So if you've ever felt used or ignored, this is your space. Welcome to my truth. I grew up in a family where, for as long as I can remember, things were never fair. My parents, although they didn't say it openly, had a favorite. My older brother, David, was always the center of attention, the pride of the house, the one who could do everything right no matter what he tried. Meanwhile, I was the silently responsible one, the one who always did what I had to do without receiving applause or words of recognition. As a child, I was the one who picked up the toys when I was done playing, the one who got good grades without anyone celebrating too much, and the one who understood that her place was that of the useful forgotten one. It's not easy growing up knowing that all your efforts go unnoticed while the spotlight is on someone else. My brother could come home late without being scolded, while I was demanded absolute punctuality and top grades, as if that were the bare minimum to deserve some attention. At family gatherings, in photos, in conversations, there was always praise for David. He's going to be a doctor, my parents would proudly say, while I was barely able to get them to ask me how I did in school. I don't know when I stopped seeking their approval and settled for doing the right thing, for being that silent figure who keeps everything in order, without anyone noticing how much I give to the family. The truth is, favoritism was like a slow burn that slowly burned away my self-esteem. I realized very early on that, even though it was there, it was invisible to them. And that hurts. It hurts when your parents don't see you as a child with dreams and hopes, but as someone who simply has to fulfill a role to maintain harmony. I was the daughter who was always there for whatever, without anyone questioning what I wanted or needed. Sometimes I remember specific moments, like when my brother won an award or achieved something important, and my mom would say, "You learn from him. He's a good example." Never a word to me, just the expectation that I would continue to be the shadow behind someone else's success. I wasn't the one shining, but I was the one who held the light so others could. And that dynamic not only shaped my childhood, but also sowed the seeds of a deep frustration that would stay with me for years. I always wondered, why do I have to be the one in charge and never celebrated? Why doesn't my effort count as much as my brother's? But I learned to keep quiet, to work in silence, to be strong even when I wasn't recognized. This family, which for many might seem like a refuge, for me was an emotional battlefield where justice never came. Love seemed conditional, and affection was measured on a scale that always left me on the wrong side. Yet, even with all that, I kept going, secretly hoping that one day, somehow, that story would change. Ever since I was just a teenager, I understood that my role in the family wasn't just being the good daughter or the model student, but also being the invisible support that kept everything running smoothly. While my parents were busy with their jobs and worries, and my brother received all the attention and opportunities, I was the one who got up early to help out at home, study, work, and make sure no one missed anything. I remember that at the age of 16, I started working in a small local business. It wasn't out of choice or whim, but because things at home weren't always enough, and I couldn't just sit idly by waiting for someone else to solve the problems. I paid bills, bought food, took the family car in for repairs, and even painted worn walls when there wasn't enough money to hire anyone else. All of this in silence, without anyone asking or thanking me. It was as if it were an unwritten duty, an obligation I assumed with resignation. At school, in addition to studying, I held down multiple part-time jobs so as not to burden my parents with all the financial responsibility. I would get up before dawn to complete my assignments and then go to class. At night, after homework and exams, I would end up running errands, helping around the house, or planning how to save a little more for emergencies. It wasn't an easy life, but it was the reality I had to live. The hardest part was that no one really noticed. My family took it for granted that everything was in order, that the lights were always on, food was always on the table, and the bills were always paid, without understanding that behind it all was someone working hard, sacrificing time, sleep, and moments they could have enjoyed. And I'm not just talking about money, but time and energy. While my parents and brother enjoyed their hobbies, trips or breaks, I would be exhausted for days. But I kept going because I felt that if I didn't do those things, no one else would. I was the one who hid behind the family facade so no one would have to worry. Sometimes, when I asked for help or recognition, they would say things like, "You're overreacting," or "That's what's expected of you as a daughter." Words that hurt because deep down, I knew I was giving everything and that no one truly valued those sacrifices. The invisibility wasn't just emotional. It was also a heavy burden I had to learn to carry alone. But the worst part wasn't just that they didn't see me, but that I often felt used. Like an ATM with a last name, someone they only turned to when they needed money or support, but never saw as a person with dreams, needs, and boundaries of their own. It's a feeling of emptiness that turns into a lump in your throat, because you know you're there, that you exist, but no one wants to acknowledge you. Still, I never complained out loud. I grew up learning that silence was the best way to survive. I accepted that invisible role because I loved my family, because I believed I was doing the right thing, because I thought that one day all that effort would be worth it and someone would notice everything I did. But, as I would discover years later, that recognition wouldn't come the way I expected. And reality, though painful, taught me that sometimes, to be seen and valued, you have to show it in ways no one expects. There came a time in my life when everything I had been doing quietly became even more crucial to my family's stability. I clearly remember when financial problems began to become apparent. My parents, who always appeared strong and confident, began to struggle with the mortgage on the family home. At first, it wasn't something they told me directly. They tried to hide it so as not to worry us, but I could tell. Calls to the bank that ended with nervous sighs, whispered conversations in the middle of the night, and the stress that began to mark their faces. The house, which for them was a symbol of stability and security, was now becoming a source of tension. I couldn't stand idly by and watch how everything we had worked so hard to build could be lost due to financial problems. So, I quietly made the decision to do something about it. Without telling anyone, I began allocating part of my salary and savings to pay off the mortgage. Every month, I transferred whatever amount I could without them suspecting, because I didn't want to worry them further or receive awkward questions. I didn't seek recognition or applause. For me, the priority was to ensure that the house remained our refuge, the place where we grew up, where we kept memories, and where there was still room for dreams despite the difficulties. I felt proud to be able to contribute to ensuring our family wouldn't lose that important place, even if it was all done in secret. But that contribution, like so many other things I did, went unnoticed. No one thanked me or said a word of support. The house was still my parents' and my brother's house, not mine, and to them, I was still the daughter who did what she had to do, but without being truly seen or valued. It was as if my efforts were an automatic duty, without real importance. Sometimes I wondered if all that sacrifice was worth it. I woke up early, worked overtime, and set aside money with everyone's stability in mind, yet I didn't feel like I was part of the family's decisions or recognition. The mortgage I silently paid was a metaphor for my role, an invisible, strong, and necessary foundation, but without my own place at the table. I remember one particular night when my parents had to deal with a call from the bank, and it seemed the debt was about to spiral out of control. At that moment, I sat in my room, did the math, and knew I could make one last effort to cover what was needed. That night I fell asleep reassured that, at least for that month, the house wasn't in danger, but also saddened by the knowledge that no one else shared that relief. Months passed, and the routine continued. I continued paying the mortgage, continuing in that role of silent support. The house remained standing, but my place in the family remained uncertain. My brother didn't seem to notice anything different, nor did my parents mention my help, and I wondered if they would ever recognize me as the person who truly held everything together when everything seemed about to fall apart. Although I felt proud of what I did, the lack of acknowledgement and the lack of recognition for my efforts created a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I knew I was doing the right thing and that my love for my family was sincere. On the other hand, the loneliness of that silent struggle weighed on me more than I was willing to admit. I never said anything because the fear of losing the little I had paralyzed me. I thought that if I spoke up, I could lose the little respect I had earned, or worse yet, that I would be seen as someone seeking recognition. So I continued to keep that secret, paying the mortgage month after month, being the invisible force that kept the family home afloat. But that silence and sacrifice only paved the way for the shock that would come later, when my parents, without even thinking about what I had done, asked me to leave because the house now belonged to my brother. It was then that I realized that everything I had given, everything I had secretly sacrificed, was worthless to them. I'll never forget the day everything changed. It was an ordinary afternoon, a day that seemed normal, but which ultimately turned into the worst moment of my life. My parents returned from the bank with a surprise, one that still hurts to remember with every fiber of my being. I remember how they entered the house, with that strange mix of nervousness and false calm they tried to project. I couldn't imagine what they were going to tell me, although, deep down, something in me already sensed it wouldn't be good. Then, with a voice that tried to sound firm but trembled a little, they told me that the title to the family home had been put in my brother's name. At first, I thought I'd heard wrong, that perhaps it was a mistake, a mix-up, or something that could be fixed. But no. It was real. The house where I had left part of my life, where I had secretly paid the mortgage to prevent it from being lost, no longer belonged to me at all. Legally, I had no right to it. I felt like the ground was opening beneath my feet. My heart tightened in a knot that was impossible to undo. I couldn't believe my parents, my own parents, were telling me so coldly that I should make my life somewhere else. As if everything I had given, everything I had silently sacrificed, meant nothing. As if I were a stranger in my own home. The words echoed in my head over and over again, a cruel repetition that kept me from thinking clearly. Make your life somewhere else. It was as if I was being expelled, as if they had decided there was no longer a place for me in the family I had kept afloat. I felt betrayed, deeply betrayed. Not by a mistake, not by a fight, but by the most absolute indifference. By the fact that for years I had been there, paying my way without anyone knowing, and now they were kicking me out without even a thank you, without an explanation other than that cold, harsh sentence. My mind tried to process the reality, but the pain was so intense that I could hardly breathe. I couldn't understand how my parents, the people who should have been my unconditional support, could do something like this. I had trusted them, had believed that family was a refuge, a place where one never feels displaced. But that trust crumbled in that instant. I felt a profound loneliness, a sense of emptiness that no words can adequately describe. It was a silent betrayal, because there was no shouting, no arguing. Just a cold decision that simply excluded me. It was as if all the love and effort I had put in had become invisible to them. At the same time, I was overcome with paralyzing disbelief. How was it possible that after everything I had done, after everything I had kept quiet and endured, my place in the family had been stripped away without even an attempt at dialogue? How could they ignore everything I had done for them? But beyond the pain, I felt something inside me change forever. The betrayal woke me up, made me open my eyes, and realized that I couldn't continue being someone's shadow, the one who always gives without receiving anything in return. I felt it was time to face reality, no matter how harsh it was. That afternoon, I sat alone in the living room, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that were overwhelming me. Sadness, anger, disappointment, but also a silent determination that was beginning to grow within me. I knew I had to move forward, that I had to build my own life away from that house that now belonged to my brother, and that my parents had denied me. Never before had I felt so small and so strong at the same time. The betrayal hurt like a direct blow to the heart, but it also made me realize something essential. That sometimes, the greatest love we can give each other is learning to let go of what no longer serves us well. And although I didn't know it at the time, that betrayal would be only the beginning of a path of self-discovery and empowerment that would take me much further than I ever imagined. After that brutal blow, when my parents told me the house was no longer mine and I had to make a life elsewhere, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't continue clinging to a family that had shut the door in my face, no matter how much I had sacrificed for them. So, with a broken heart, but a clear mind, I made the decision that changed everything. I moved. But I didn't leave empty-handed or with a defeated soul. No, quietly, for years, while they didn't even notice, I was forging my own path. I began investing in myself, in my dreams, and in my future, little by little, without making a fuss. I opened a small business that began as just an idea, a modest project that I managed in my free time, between work and the responsibilities that life had imposed on me. While they believed I was sinking into defeat, I was learning to fly. I invested in courses, in connections, in new opportunities. I took trips that opened my mind and heart, that taught me that the world is much bigger than that house and those walls that now denied me. Every step I took was a silent declaration that I didn't need their approval to be valuable, to be strong, to be happy. Far from the shadow they had tried to impose on me, I began to shine with my own light. I moved into a small apartment that, although humble, was mine and mine alone. It was my refuge, the space where I could be who I truly wanted to be, without fear or chains. There, day after day, I worked on my business, tended to my investments, and planned my future, without anyone suspecting the storm that was silently brewing. It was a slow and often lonely process. There were times when I doubted, when I wanted to give up. But I remembered that pain of betrayal and used it as fuel to keep going. Every bill paid, every contract closed, every small achievement was a triumph over the indifference they had shown me. I wasn't seeking revenge, but rather silent justice, to prove to myself that I could get ahead on my own, without asking permission or expecting recognition. In those months and years, I learned to value my own efforts, to trust in my abilities, and not to depend on anyone else's support or approval. I discovered that true strength lay not in the house I'd been denied, but in the resilience I'd built within myself. And so, far from family judgments and expectations, my life began to transform. When I least expected it, my small business grew. What began as a modest project became a company that generated a steady income and allowed me to dream big. My investments, which I had made with caution and patience, began to bear fruit. I was able to travel to places I'd always wanted to see, not to escape, but to fill myself with new ideas and experiences that enriched my spirit. Everything I had lost in that painful moment, I was recovering multiplied in the form of freedom, security, and inner peace. Without making a sound, without shouting, without direct confrontations, I was taking control of my destiny. It was a silent counterattack, a way of saying without words that no one has the right to underestimate me or erase me from my own story. Every day I felt stronger, more complete, more in control of my life. And although the wound of betrayal was still there, it no longer hurt the same. I had found within myself a much more powerful reason to keep going than any broken family ties or any disdain I had ever received. This path I embarked on in silence taught me that sometimes the best blow is not the one struck in fury, but the one prepared with patience, intelligence, and self-love. That getting up after falling is not only possible, but necessary, and that building your own life, far from the shadows of the past, is the greatest triumph anyone can achieve. So, while they continued in their world of false certainties, I was already living the life I always deserved, with dignity and the strength that only true self-improvement can bring. Months passed, and then years, and life went on far from that house I once thought would be my refuge forever. My business was thriving, my investments were bearing fruit, and I had found a balance I never imagined possible after so much pain. But, as in every family story, fate had other plans. One day, without warning, news began to arrive. I learned, first through a cryptic message from a mutual acquaintance, then through calls I avoided, and finally through my mother's trembling voice on the phone, that things at home weren't going well. My brother's business, the one to whom the house had been transferred and to whom my parents had given everything, was in serious trouble. Debts were piling up, clients were disappearing, and the mortgage I'd fought so hard to keep stable was now on the verge of falling into the hands of the banks. It hurt to hear those words, a bitter mix of nostalgia and frustration, because even though they had closed the door on me, that home was still part of my history, my blood, my roots. What came next was a surprise, and not exactly a pleasant one. My parents, who had told me so many times to leave, to find another place, that the house was no longer mine, suddenly began urgently searching for me. At first, I ignored their messages, their missed calls, their pleas disguised as half-hearted apologies. But reality hit me when I heard my father's voice, broken and almost pleading, saying to me, with a mixture of shame and desperation, "Elizabeth, we need your help, again." That "again" echoed in my head like a cruel irony. How was it possible that now, when they were on the brink of financial ruin, they wanted to count on me? Had all the sacrifice and betrayal from before taught them nothing? But above all, what did they expect me to do? I remember that night I couldn't sleep. I thought about everything I'd been through, every moment they ignored me, every humiliation I endured in silence, every tear I shed in solitude. I thought about the times when, with my own resources and without asking for anything in return, I had kept that house and that family afloat. And now, when things were getting complicated, they wanted me to be the savior, the one to solve all their problems. It wasn't easy deciding what to do. On one hand, there was indignation, the pent-up rage that told me I should close the door on them once and for all. But on the other, there was something deeper. Family, that invisible bond that, though broken and torn, still existed. I thought about my siblings, my parents, all those years of silent sacrifices that had made me who I was. So, after much thought, I decided to answer. Not with an immediate yes, nor with a categorical no, but with one condition. This time, the rules were going to change. I wasn't going to be the one who always gave without receiving anything in return. I wasn't going to be anyone else's ATM or invisible support. It was time to set boundaries, demand respect, and show that my worth didn't depend on their need. When I finally met with them, I saw the mix of guilt and hope in their eyes. My brother, who had lived with the privilege of everything I had built without them acknowledging it, now faced the consequences of his bad decisions. My parents, tired and repentant, begged me for help, aware that without me, everything could fall apart. But I was no longer the same person who had left that house years before. I had grown, learned to value myself, and knew that helping didn't mean allowing myself to be trampled on or repeating the same mistakes of the past. So I proposed a firm and clear plan that involved transparency, commitment, and, above all, mutual respect. That family awakening was hard for everyone because it exposed deep wounds and uncomfortable truths. But it was also necessary, because for the first time in a long time, it forced us to look beyond the grudges and old wounds, to understand that family isn't perfect, but it can be rebuilt if everyone does their part. From then on, things began to change. Not magically or immediately, but with slow, steady steps toward a new balance. I continued to build my path, but I also made space for them, on the condition that they learn to value what they have and respect who I am. This chapter of my life taught me that family can fail, betray, and forget you, but it can also awaken when you least expect it, when you need them to be there, and that true power lies in knowing when to help and when to protect yourself. After everything I've been through, after the years of silent struggle, after the wounds I never imagined would leave such a deep scar, I can say with complete certainty that I'm no longer the same person who once paid the mortgage on that house without asking for anything in return, nor the one who accepted betrayal without raising her voice. I've changed. Not because I sought revenge or because I harbored resentment, but because I learned to value myself, to set clear boundaries, and to understand that self-love and dignity are non-negotiable, not even with the family you carry in your blood. When they told me the house was no longer mine, that I had to leave and make my life elsewhere, something inside me broke, yes, but not because I gave up or disappeared. It was the beginning of an awakening that led me to build a new life, stronger, freer, and more aware of my own worth. Now I know that I don't need the approval of those who discarded me or the validation of those who ignored me. I don't seek revenge, nor do I want to see them fall, because true victory lies in living in peace, with my head held high and my heart at peace. Success isn't measured by what you take from others, but by what you build for yourself, with effort, patience, and respect. That's why, today I can say, to them and to everyone who ever felt forgotten or used, thank you for kicking me out. It was, without a doubt, the best thing you could have done for me. Because by forcing me to leave that house, you forced me to find my true home within myself, to create a space where respect, independence, and happiness didn't depend on anyone else. I don't hold grudges, because I know that everyone does what they can with what they have, and my parents and siblings also have their own wounds and limitations. But I also won't go back to being the person who silently sacrificed themselves while others enjoyed themselves without acknowledging it. I've learned that healthy love isn't based on constant sacrifice, but on balance and mutual respect. This chapter taught me that sometimes goodbyes, although painful, are necessary for us to grow and flourish. That true power lies in letting go of what hurts us and choosing paths that lead us to fulfillment, not resignation. So for those who are watching this and feel like their efforts are never enough, that their sacrifices are unappreciated, that they are being used like an ATM with a last name, don't lose faith in yourselves. Because the world is vast and the opportunities are many. Sometimes, breaking out of that toxic cycle is the key that opens the door to a better life. I am Elizabeth, and this is my story of pain, struggle, silence, and ultimately, liberation. I hope my experience inspires you to find your own strength, to set boundaries, and above all, to never forget that you deserve respect and true love, without conditions or invisible sacrifices. Thank you for following me this far. Remember to subscribe and share if this story touched a chord with you. Because together, we can transform pain into hope, and injustice into self-righteousness. After everything I had experienced, every tear shed, every invisible sacrifice, and every profound disappointment, something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the person who, with her heart on her sleeve, gave everything without expecting anything in return, nor who accepted the crumbs of affection or recognition that the family decided to give me drop by drop. No, now I understood that self-love and self-respect were the foundation of any relationship, even the closest, like those of blood. When they told me the house was no longer mine, that I had to leave, I felt a painful emptiness, but also a spark that ignited my will to rebuild myself from the ground up, without fear and without resentment. That decision, so difficult at the time, was actually the first step toward my emotional and financial freedom. And now, looking back, I can say with certainty that it was the best thing anyone ever did to me. I don't need revenge, I don't want them to pay for the damage, nor do I want them to feel the weight of my silence turned into contempt. It's not about that. It's about healing, moving forward, and knowing how to set clear boundaries when someone fails you again and again. I don't hold grudges, but I won't sacrifice them again, let them use me, or be the invisible shadow that holds up the family facade. In this new phase, my life is mine. My time, my energy, and my love are reserved for those who truly value me, those who respect me, and those who contribute to my growth, not for those who only complain when they're in crisis and forget me when everything's going well. I've learned that not every sacrifice is worth it if it destroys you in the process. That helping doesn't mean canceling yourself out, or being a lifeline for those who never learned to swim alone. And that sometimes, the best way to love is also to step back, put yourself first, and let life show you who truly deserves to be by your side. I am deeply grateful for being kicked out of that home, because it forced me to discover my true worth, my inner strength, and the ability to create something of my own without depending on anyone else. Thank you for underestimating me, because it gave me the opportunity to surprise you with my independence and success. Now I walk with my head held high, aware that my story doesn't depend on my family's approval, but on my determination, my effort, and my self-love. I am more than the forgotten sister or the pay the bills. I am a woman who reinvented herself, who built her future, and who learned that respect begins with oneself. And if you're listening to this, I want you to know something. Don't let anyone define or limit you. Don't let silence or lack of recognition dim your light. Because, at the end of the day, the greatest triumph is that which is built with dignity, calmly, without the need to make noise or seek applause. Thank you for kicking me out. It was the best thing anyone ever did to me. Throughout this story, I've realized that true strength isn't always shown in grand gestures, shouts, or dramas that everyone can see. No, true courage is often hidden in the everyday, in those silent acts that go unnoticed by the world, but that change lives. Because heroes don't always wear capes or crowns. Sometimes, heroes wear signatures on contracts that no one sees, secret transfers, sleepless nights wondering how to support those who don't know how to value your efforts, and an infinite patience that only those who have been invisible know. I've learned that courage isn't found in the one who shouts the loudest, but in the one who perseveres unnoticed, in the one who builds their path with sweat and tears while others celebrate the shadows. Silence isn't absence, it's contained strength. Perseverance isn't routine, it's the engine that drives real change. And love without recognition, though painful, is the seed of resilience that prepares you for a future that no one can steal from you. If you're reading this and have ever felt like the one to be replaced in your own family, as if your sacrifice were invisible or your worth ignored, I want you to know that you are not alone. That there is immense power in recognizing your own worth, even when no one else does. That you deserve respect, genuine love, and a place in the world where you are valued for who you truly are. Therefore, I invite you not to give up, to keep fighting with dignity, to hold your head high even if the path is lonely. Because in the end, what you build with your hands and your heart will be irrefutable proof of your greatness. You don't need the approval of those who didn't see it, only your own, and the certainty that one day, when they least expect it, your silent effort will become the story that inspires others not to give up. Thank you for joining me in this story, and if any part of it resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community that knows what it's like to struggle in silence, but not without power or dignity. We're here to support each other, to share, to heal, and to grow. Remember, never underestimate the power of those who work in silence, because one day that silence becomes the loudest cry that no one can ignore.